Hi, I'm Tim of the 1916 Company, announcing our all-new 1916 Company app. Check out our all-new community features, including wrist time, where you can log the watch you wear, how often you wear your watches, and see a graphical representation of how you use your collection. But wait, there's more, because this wrist time feature allows you to post in real time to our live feed of user wrist shots. Our community functions also include professionally moderated discussions, all sorts of views, debate, insights into what people want to say about the watches of our times, and all your favorite features are coming back, including media, editorial from Jack Forster, video from yours truly. You can continue to build your online collection and your wish list, plus all the commercial features are back. Buy, trade, and sell through the app, browse our global inventory of pre-owned and new watches. A wrist shot could begin the process of a trade or a purchase. Find the 1916 Company app on the Apple App Store and Google. Hi, I'm Tim, he's Jack, this is the 1916 Company, and today we're talking about dive watches. Now, I don't understand how something so specialized became the default luxury watch, but it certainly seems like when most people talk about luxury watches today, the one and only watch, the high end, the aspirational watch, it's often a dive watch. How did we get here?
You know, that's a very good question. It's actually a good question for me because every once in a while I go through my motley assembly of watches, which I would not dignify with the name collection because I really just accumulated them over the years. And a surprising number of them have black dials, and a surprising number of them are dive watches. You know, there's a bunch of Seiko divers, a couple of Tudors, and I think that part of the reason that dive watches have become so ubiquitous is that they're everything that, you know, a lot of guys want in a watch but turned up to 11. You know, so you want something that says, you know, spirit of adventure, dive watch. You want something that says durability under trying circumstances, dive watch. You want something that says, you know, not going to flood with water if you take a shower with me or sit in the hot tub or, you know, go for a swim in the ocean, dive watch. And, you know, they look tough, they are tough, they're easy to use and easy to understand, and maybe that's all it takes.
Yeah, I mean, that might be the case, because if you went back to the 1950s and you started talking to people about dive watches, it would have been like something you associate with an aqualung and flippers. It was not something that you would ever see in a social context or an office environment. I just think maybe through the 1980s, as we moved away from that era of utilitarian watches as a necessity, people started to look at who the leading brands were and what their leading models were, and somehow dive watches on bracelets. I mean, Rolex Submariner is a great example, the Omega Seamaster is another. It became like a standard in the office. If you're gonna have an iconic watch from one of those leading brands, it was probably gonna be something utilitarian. If it was utilitarian, it was gonna be a diver. It's almost like we got there by default and then we sort of embraced it.
Yeah, I think about James Bond wearing a Rolex and Dr. No, and that movie came out in 1962, which is the year that I was born, so I don't, if you had been born then, you would probably, your memory's good enough that you probably would remember the zeitgeist, but I don't. But you know, I wonder about that, because 62 is not that far off from the classic dress watches of the late 1940s and the, you know, in the 1950s. And all of a sudden we see this, you know, specialized piece of technical dive equipment, which, you know, the Submariner arguably still was back then, on the wrist of a character in a major motion picture. And I'm kind of wondering, I mean, it's hard to know now, you know, because it was 62 years ago, but I just sort of wonder how that, I mean, we know how it happened in terms of,
oh yeah,
you know,
well, let's think of this. Obviously there's the ascendance of Rolex and the Submariner is the iconic piece. But let's run with this idea of like product placement, because my era of James Bond, the first James Bond I saw in theaters was Pierce Brosnan. And during the 1990s, now we're well past the quartz crisis, no one needs a dive watch for work.
Right.
Now it's the Omega Seamaster, and it's on everyone's wrist because, well, massive marketing. And I'm not going to judge that. I certainly found it compelling enough to get the watch myself. I own an Omega Seamaster diver 300 meter from the period. But when you look at oh yeah, that's my graduation watch.
Oh, that's amazing.
You guys know that. He didn't know. You know that.
I had no idea.
So, you know, I thought that was really cool back when I was 18 years old and I had a fistful of high school graduation money. I bought two things. I bought a computer, a laptop, and I bought the watch. And everyone's like, you should have spent all the money on school. I'm like, yeah, well, the computer's junk now. The watch is still in my collection. But yeah, I mean, let's be honest. Marketing definitely made the difference, at least for me, for a lot of folks in the modern era, because it does appeal to all those values you mentioned. It's virile, it's rugged, it's compact enough to fit under a cuff. It's not as bulky as a massive complication. it's genteel enough that it could be, passable in an office, but it's also the thing you wear everywhere else.
Yeah, and I mean, despite the fact that for a dive watch to be called a dive watch, it has to, at least if you're a manufacturer that's adhering to the international standard for dive watches, there are certain features that they all have to have, and so they tend to have a certain family similarity. But despite that, they can show a surprising range of designs and personalities.
Yeah, and so it's really interesting to see just how many divers there are out there. I don't know how we got to this point where every man in America, and women, not forgetting you either, but has a dive watch in an office. A blue-collar watch in a white-collar trade, it's almost become the rule rather than the exception. So let's talk about our personal favorites. I'm going to be honest, I love that old 253180, that James Bond Seamaster. Yes, I know the original one in GoldenEye was quartz minus mechanical. Stay with me here. But what a cool watch. I mean, think about this. Back in 1993, when that model came out, the Seamaster, in some form or another, had been in the collection since 1948. And every 5 to 10 years, it was redesigned. And it would just be obliteration, start again. It never had the continuity of the Rolex Submariner until that James Bond adopted, we'll generally call it adopted design. And that design's still in the catalog today. So for me, the watch I bought's got to be my favorite dive watch. It's going to be that 90s era Brosnan skeleton hand Seamaster.
I've never owned a Seamaster, but I'd like to. And I mean, it's an absolutely classic design. If you from a design standpoint, I think it's an objectively beautiful watch. And dive watches are not always objectively beautiful. Sometimes they're willfully ugly.
That's true.
It's the same company. Talk about the Ploprof. I mean, that's about as aesthetically pleasing as a backhoe.
I'm going to run with that because I love the Ploprof. I think we love it because of its aesthetic shortcomings rather than in spite of it.
Yeah.
But I really like those.
It's like having a Staffordshire Bull Terrier. You appreciate it because it's so unbelievably ugly.
Or a pug. I mean, you guys know I love pugs. But you guys, throw up a graphic of a pug for me. Okay, so here's the thing about dive watches. They started utilitarian, then they became standard issue in the office. How do we feel about super high-end dive watches like the Blancpain 50 Fathoms, Richard Mille jumping into the dive genre with chronographs, divers, Tourbillon, the Audemars Piguet Royal Oak offshore diver? How do we feel about these super blue blood dive watches that you can get now?
As a category, I'm not a huge fan of. We've seen dive tourbillons, we've seen dive watches kitted out with all sorts of different complications, and it just feels kind of, I don't know. It feels antithetical to the whole sort of spirit of what a dive watch should be. It's like buying a Ford pickup truck and
with white leather, 24-inch polished wheels, body color trim, premium stereo. Yeah,
exactly.
And it hauls nothing but derriere. But
and it's like, that sort of thing is kind of it's bizarrely fascinating as a sort of perverse manifestation of the nature of modern luxury and the intersection of high and low. But it's not a very satisfying dive watch.
Yeah, I will definitely say some of these like RM25, RM28 type watches, they leave me cold. I do like the idea, though, of a traditional dive watch done well. If God is in the details, rather than just making it bombastically big, expensive, and elaborate, I really loved the 2003 Blancpain 50 Fathoms 50th anniversary piece.
Oh, I love that watch.
It was like...
Absolutely loved it.
The 2200A, guys, 40.3 millimeters, very similar to the current reference 5008, but everything a dive watch should be and luxury, but without being offensively over-refined.
Yeah, there's a somewhere deep in the Blancpain archives, there's a video recording that I did with Bob Maloubier. It was a couple of years before he died, and that was still when Blancpain was still talking very much about the history of 50 Fathoms as a watch used by French combat divers, and how Captain Maloubier was involved in the development of the watch. And it was a fascinating conversation. I don't think we ever did anything with it. I don't think Blancpain ever did anything with it. But I loved the 2003 50th anniversary, and I really fell in love with the watch because it seemed to come from a very genuine place, a very authentic place. But what it doesn't have, of course, in the minds of a lot of modern enthusiasts and modern collectors, is the kind of continuity of use that you see from things like the Submariner or even Tudor.
That's definitely a challenge with Blancpain because it is sort of a revival brand. And a lot of people forget that even though the company was revived in 1982, it wasn't defunct for too long. It wasn't until 1998 that they started making the 50 Fathoms again. And then it was a small watch, 38 millimeters. It had these odd sort of like raised and relieved numbers on the bezel.
Yeah.
If you see the trilogy pieces, you'll see exactly what I mean by that. Take a look at those. But they really recast the die in 2003 with that anniversary piece, and that became the design template that led to the 2007 5015, the current 5010. Like, that was the touchstone for the entire modern era of the 50 Fathoms.
Yeah, I remember that first generation of 50 Fathoms, you know, the with the raised numerals on the bezel, and
Yeah, like the Concept 2000, things like that.
Yeah, and we couldn't. I mean, we sort of couldn't get away from that fast enough when the 50th anniversary piece came out. But they've got a weird kind of retro charm, I think.
Yeah, there's something strangely 90s about them. Like, from the era when tiny watches and two-tone were really cool, this was also considered to be really chic. Like, I guarantee you back in 1998, someone would have seen that in a case and said, ooh, I want that. Like, I'd like that alongside my Cartier Pasha bar dial two-tone. You know, it's just like, it was very much of the times.
Yeah. Those two watches would actually make a nice two-watch collection.
Back when
if you had a very particular kind of taste.
Yeah, I mean, back when like the entry level to luxury was like a Raymond Weil Parsifal.
Yeah.
You know, it was that sort of era.
Yeah.
But I do get what you're saying there, and it was a little bit compelling too, because initially they came out with complications. They had a GMT, they had a flyback chronograph, but that 2003 model, they only made 3 flights of 50. So they made one series of 50 for the Americas, one for Europe, one for Asia. The boxed set was beautiful. It came with tools for strap changing. And if you've seen like the strap on the recent Tech Gombessa, like the full gauntlet rubber, it came with that too. So it was a really well thought out set. It was just a great moment in dive watch history.
Yeah, I thought so. You know, it's funny. It wasn't my very first quote unquote good watch, but one of my my second automatic was a dive watch. It was a Seiko SKX 007, the only watch that I've ever bought that's increased in value.
Wow. I mean, I've only broken even once, so you've got me beat. Very cool. I mean, I guess the SKX really does sort of preserve that sort of, I guess, rugged utilitarian aspect of the diver. You know, you've got some divers from Zinn, you've got some divers from Damasco, you've got some divers from Seiko that are still mechanical, but they're still very true to the origins of the species, I think you could say.
Yeah, mine was actually, so I say it was my first dive watch. The very first one that I bought actually turned out to be a Faco.
You weren't out too much money, though.
No. I bought it at a sketchy electronics shop on First Avenue. You know, back in the days when there were, you know, all these sketchy stores in Lower Manhattan that basically specialized in selling stuff that had fallen off the back of a truck. So I bought the watch, and I'd been on, you know, the early watch internet, you know, long enough to know that it was kind of, I wouldn't say revered, but like well respected even by serious watch enthusiasts as a, you know, as a dive watch with a lot of integrity that wouldn't cost you, you know, a ton of money. And I was having a blast wearing it, and then 2 months after I bought it, I was at the swimming pool with one of my kids, and I noticed that the chrome was wearing off the lugs and the brass was showing through, and I was upset.
You know, I gotta say,
I went back to sketchy electronics shop and they exchanged it.
Yeah, I was gonna say that sounds almost like the boutique experience version of the guy with the trench coat. But I mean, hey, all shout out to Sketchy Boutique wherever you were. And was this on 47th Street or was this?
No, it was first between I think 15th and 16th.
Yeah, because the guy with the trench coat is usually down on Chambers Street, and he's usually not selling Seiko ripoffs. So that's an interesting story. I guess it's kind of fun to think about like where dive watches started. They were very rugged, very elemental, and purist watches in a lot of ways because they just had to do one job really well. And I think the company, other than possibly Seiko, that does that the best right now with mechanical dive watches is probably Tudor.
Yeah. I don't think there's any question. The Pelagos, especially, I think. I mean, I have a Blancpain, I love it very much. But I think the Pelagos is probably the ultimate example nowadays of the really unadorned, purpose-built, no frills, built to last and built to do a tough job under tough conditions dive watch.
Yeah, it does certainly feel that way. It's got only a few vintage accents. Like if you want a very traditional vintage-inspired diver, you get a Blancpain. Yeah. If you want a modern Tudor dive watch, you get the Pelagos. And I would get the LHD because I think the left-hand drive is the quirkiest of them. It's got a little bit of color, it's got a little bit of a tint to it. I think the left-hand drive is kind of a fun thing, even if it's completely unnecessary. and you do get a lot of capability with it.
You do. I'm an FXD fan myself.
Yeah, I'm not gonna dispute that. That was probably a stroke of brilliance, especially when they started bringing back in military-style cases and also military involvement with mechanical watches. Like, I thought the era of service-issued mechanical watches probably ended sometime in the early 2000s. I think it was very cool of Tudor to sort of bring that back.
You know, the whole concept of military issued watches kind of gave way to the notion of and the production of unit watches.
Yes.
Which Bremont was until very recently. Bremont was heavily involved in producing unit watches.
Yeah. I mean, that's a great example, because back in the day it was very common to get unit watches run when these things were being sold out of PXs or Nexes on base. And if you go back to a lot of those guys from the Vietnam era, a lot of them did buy their Tudor watches on base. You could get unit insignia on the back. And in the modern era, I mean, you've seen stuff like the Polipetto. It's still possible to get unit designations or service designations if you ask politely. But I think at the end of the day, what I guess endears Tudor to me so much is that they were willing to make a couple of weird watches, and I want to just focus on 3 of those. One, the Blancpain 925. Did you see sterling silver and taupe on the bingo card that year?
No.
I didn't either. The incredibly strange Blancpain P01.
I love that watch.
I like that one too.
I mean, I obviously didn't love it enough to spend money on one, but I thought it was super cool.
And you know what the great thing about it was so obviously not an attempt to exploit a commercial niche, because no one was asking for an enormous locking bezel vintage replica that year. There was a social media campaign that preceded it that led a lot of people to believe that a Tudor Submariner was coming. And then they got this incredibly weird US Navy 1967 prototype tribute watch. And I loved it, but everyone's like, that's not the watch I wanted. I wanted the purist's piece. This is too big. This is too weird. This is too different.
Yeah, but it was interesting. The only watch that I have that's based on I have one watch that's based on a dive watch prototype, which is the Bulova mil-spec diver. And, and they got Bulova/Citizen got a lot of flack for that one because the lugs were the same 15 millimeter width as the actual prototype. So it was a pretty I would say faithful cut and paste of the original, and I hadn't worn it for, this is a little bit embarrassing, but I hadn't worn it for about a year, and then I picked it up a couple of weeks ago and put it on, and I tried to turn the bezel and it wouldn't turn, and I'd completely forgotten that it's a locking bezel that you have to push down to turn. So I was sitting there like, this watch is only a couple of years old, man, it shouldn't be breaking down like this. What a ripoff, I can't be a Bullivist enthusiast. Oh, yeah.
It's like when you call up the customer service line, like, yeah, did you turn it on and turn it off? Do it again? Okay. Yeah. It's been real. Yeah. Click. But yeah, I would also say with Tudor, what I really liked was the very cool Marine Nationale. The MN21, which some people prefer over every subsequent model for reasons I can't fathom, was a really neat way of taking the history of Tudor and bringing it up to the present. Because I think you can only go to the well so many times, talking about things that happened in the 50s, 60s, or 70s. And to make it relevant again with a connection to modern service forces, I thought that was a really cool idea. And even if the watch can be a little bit of an ergonomic and practical compromise, I thought the focus of the model was admirable.
We were talking just a few minutes ago about Tudor doing a Blancpain sterling silver. Let's talk about the real 800-pound gorilla in the room. Let's if we're going to talk about materials that are used in dive watches that are completely inappropriate for dive watches, let's talk about bronze.
Okay, yeah, bronze is fun because it has nautical associations. But if you've ever noticed the use of bronze in a nautical setting, it's almost always above the waterline. So you wind up with a very weird effect if you start diving with those things. I've seen wrists turn blue. I've seen watches turn green. I think it's done for purely artistic reasons. Like, I think this is a kind of male peacocking, and bronze does that better than almost anything else.
I mean, it's a cool material. The other big place that bronze is used in marine settings is for propellers. Yeah. But I've wondered about that. I've done a little bit of research, but not enough to have a real sense of the question. I think that where you run into problem with bronze is when you immerse it in salt water and then expose it to an oxygen atmosphere repeatedly. So if it's a propeller on a ship and it's underwater the whole time, then you don't really have the corrosion problems that you have in something that gets wet and then dries out in the atmosphere and gets wet and then dries out in the atmosphere. I think it's when you when those salts start interacting with oxygen in the atmosphere that you run into trouble.
Yeah.
So rinse your watch.
It's going to be, no matter what, it's going to be a living metal, and I think that's kind of cool. But you have to know what you're getting into, and I think that's why towards the end of the bronze watch fad, you saw more aluminum-intensive bronze alloys that were less likely to change over time. I think Tudor is another good example of that, where they had a notably yellower and less reactive bronze, whereas there are some bronze watches out there, and actually I've got one from Azimuth, that will genuinely start to change color in ways that make the watch unrecognizable. And I like that, but you got to be ready for it, know what you're signing up for, and especially in a dive watch format like the original Panerai Bronzo, you're going to have a watch that is going to look dramatically different if you use it as intended, and you got to be ready for that.
Yeah. The aluminum bronzes specifically are the formulations that are used in marine applications. But I think about the kind of ancestor of all modern bronze watches, the Gentic Geffica.
Oh yeah.
And boy, oh boy, I've seen pictures of those from many years ago, where what the base metal is anybody's guess.
Yeah, so we're getting a little bit off track there. Definitely check out that Geffica, because it was based on the names of 3 people, Gentenu, who I think went hunting, and then he created this crazy beaded case watch that, as far as I know, and I think as far as both of us know, was the original bronze watch. Now, in terms of divers, I got to admit there's a lot out there that's interesting to me, but sometimes it's the stuff that's so different that it just doesn't fit neatly into a category. Like in 2010, Eterna and Porsche Design made this thing called the P6780, and it had a strap with an expanding clasp. It had a tilting and telescoping case. So you could actually withdraw the case that had a bullhead winder. You could wind it and set it when it was still on your wrist, and then snap it into position. And it had this crazy ratcheting bezel that was about as different from a regular sub or Seamaster as anything I've seen. It was wonderfully
never handled one.
weird.
Have you handled one?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
It was wonderfully weird, and I love it because there is no more hackneyed genre than the dive watch, and they broke almost every rule.
I mean, that is the 68. That is the $68,000 question with dive watches, right? I mean, it's you're hired by Omega, and it's your first day on the job, and you've been for some reason, promoted to, part of the design team for dive watches, and you sit down and they're like, well, all right, we got to do something new, and like, what is there to do?
Yeah, well, I mean, you're going to have to make some people angry because that was always a niche product. You look at the P01, that's another example. And maybe this is just a lesson, like you don't want to innovate too much with a dive watch or you're going to get burned for it. And I think that's often the case. You look at the Modern Aero Ploprof that came out in 2009, it's always been a niche piece. You look at the P01, super niche. You look at something like the P6780, and even by Eterna standards, that's a low volume watch.
Yeah, the P01 that's a fascinating situation because it's one of those watches that made people people were erupting in nuclear rage because of that watch. And I mean, it's a watch, and I mean, like you, I've seen thousands, maybe millions of them at this point, and I just don't get mad at watches anymore. And it reveals something about how profoundly it's possible for us to identify ourselves with the qualities that we admire in a watch. And when it doesn't have those qualities, and you feel like it should be part of the family, it can be hard for people to deal with. Another phenomenon in dive watches that I think is really fascinating because it really is all about it's engineering peacocking, but it's still, I don't know, maybe there are other ways to describe it, but ultra deep dive watches.
You mean when the watch is water resistant to 35,000 feet?
Yeah.
Or some depth in excess of the ocean itself?
Right.
Yeah, I mean, if you've got a watch that's 35,000 feet rated and it's an ISO 6425, then it's been tested to 125% of that, which is impossible. That's always a weird thing to me because if you think about it,
where the hell is the pressure chamber for testing something like that?
You know what? I think, again, forgive me here, but I've seen Rolex use a Comex designed pressure chamber for testing the deep seas. So I think in terms of certifying the watch, there are factory facilities that can do that, and I'm sure all of the brands have stuff like that.
Sure.
But I would also say this, isn't just even 300 meters more than any human being can withstand? That'll get you to the Andrea Doria, that'll get you to the bottom of any diveable wreck, like that'll get you to any, fossil fuel exploitation site at the bottom of the Gulf of Mexico where a human being can dive.
The absolute record for scuba diving was, and I'm going on memory, and mine's not as good as yours, but there was a Comex experimental dive where they got as far down as I think 700 plus meters. But I mean, recreational, people complain about 100-meter dive watches. Recreational scuba, we all know it's 40 meters.
Yeah, I mean, most of the time, I'd say the only way you're ever going to need this is if you're over the Mariana Trench, you drop your watch overboard, and you're like, well, let's go get it. That's get the submersible. We need to get my watch. Right. That thing's expensive.
I mean, the other circumstance under which you might need something to go deeper than 200 meters is if you're a professional saturation diver. And those guys do occasionally work at depths greater than 200 meters,
yeah, especially if you're going to wear it on the outside of some kind of suit. I can see it being in excess of human potential. But keep in mind that if you're wearing it on the outside of a suit, it's not going to be subject to the gas environment that the person is subject to.
Right.
So would you really need the helium escape valve under those circumstances?
Well,
if it's on the outside and you're breathing the exotic mixture, I'm not sure it's going to absorb any helium.
The helium escape valve is there not because it's part of the breathing circuit, but because there's helium in the atmosphere in the pressurization and depressurization habitat. So what happens allegedly is that if you're a saturation diver, you're doing a 2 or 3 week working cycle. You work at depth and you live while you're working in a saturation chamber that has the same pressure as the working depth that you're at, and you're breathing a helium atmosphere so that you don't go bananas from nitrogen narcosis. So the helium atoms are small enough to work their way
I know the mechanic of it.
seals.
I'm just saying, if the guy's only wearing the thing when he's outside,
right?
Like if it's part of his external equipment, I'm not quite sure how that works. He would have to be going into and out of an airlock to get the thing exposed.
Yeah, well, if he's wearing it on his wrist while he's in the habitat, then the helium is going to get in from the atmosphere. But there were a couple of things that I always sort of wondered about that. The first is, well, if you're really worried about the crystal popping off, why don't you just unscrew the crown a little bit and the pressure will stay equalized while you're depressurizing? The second thing is that has anyone ever actually seen a crystal pop off a watch during depressurization? And I've read one.
Maybe in the early days of this, when people didn't know what to expect, because in the early days there were both Submariner, like 5513s with helium escape valves, and also early sea dwellers.
Right.
But you have one big decompression when you're a saturation diver. You're going to compress, you're going to live at that pressure, and then you're going to decompress once. And that's when the helium escape valve becomes necessary. My guess is at some point someone had some cheapo watch, it got blown to pieces, and then they reported that to whoever made the subsequent Doxas and Rolex models that incorporated the helium valves. Right. But then there's also some interesting watches where they say they're so tight they don't need it. Like the original Ploprof, they said we don't need a helium valve because this is so hermetically tight that the helium can't get in, so it doesn't need to get out. And for a lot of years, Seiko dive watches used the same principle.
Same thing,
They had no helium escape valve, but it said saturation gas dive watch on the back.
Yeah, they developed this gasket with a weird L-shaped cross section that it basically did the job. So do you need a helium release valve if you engineer somebody who's not a fan of helium escape valves would point to watches like that, and they would say you don't need a helium escape valve if you engineer the gaskets properly.
You might also say that you would have to maintain your watch more religiously.
Yeah.
Because most people don't. Let's face it, we all know that guy who's got like a 15-year-old dive watch. It's never been in for service. He takes it swimming every year. Don't be that guy. Okay, let's put together a little collection here speculatively. 3 dive watches, what would you buy?
Oh boy, a quartz Seiko Marine Master, a Omega Ultra Deep 6,000 meters, just because I think if you're putting together a dive watch collection, you should have one of these ridiculous feats of engineering that's completely useless from a practical standpoint. And then the third one, probably a Pelagos FXD.
Okay, so for me,
which technically is not a dive watch, I guess, because it's got a bidirectional bezel.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's sort of a little bit of a contradiction, but there are many Pelagos and also Blancpain models that are maybe members of the family, but they're not in the family business, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
So I'm going to have to say my James Bond Seamaster because I own it. I love it. It's my forever watch. I would also like to own something a little bit weird. So how about a 1980s Girard Perregaux 7100, one of the really early ones with the Longines L990 movement, because they later went
That's
to
cool.
ETA.
Yeah.
Tritium dial, nice cool 80s style diver. We don't see many of them. And then
They've
finally,
gotten out of the
well, they haven't
dive
been
watch
making a
business
whole lot of
entirely.
Hawks lately. That's
Yeah,
for
they-
that's
yeah,
not a whole lot of Seahawks. That used to be their thing.
It did, and it doesn't look like they're planning on getting back into that business anytime soon, which I think is a little bit of a shame because I like the Seahawk.
Yeah, I did too, but GP, please make that happen. So I would also add that 2003 anniversary 50 Fathoms, because talk about the full package, bracelets, straps, the gear to swap between them, so much history, a beautiful design. That was the beginning of the modern 50 Fathoms, having the cambered sapphire capped bezel, and scaled up in 2007, that would be the look of the 50 Fathoms for almost the next 2 decades. So in terms of being both an important watch as a breakthrough for the company, getting back into divers in earnest, and really reconnecting with that history in a way that the earlier revivals didn't. And then also setting the template for what a 50 Fathoms has looked like to, the luxury buyer ever since.
Yeah.
I think it was a very important watch. So yeah, those would be my choices, and I think that gives me a little bit of everything. It gives me history, it gives me contemporary, it gives me modern, it gives me vintage, and it gives me something with that Seamaster that remains very personal to me.
What about something really off the wall, like that day Bethune with the generator inside it?
Ooh, I like that too. And I didn't want to bring that in because people know I'm sort of in the tank for Debatoon. I love the company. But at the end of the day, yeah, if you want a watch that lights up, that has no batteries, that has no motors, that has no capacitors to power it, a dynamo-driven LED, super high-end dive watch. That should have been our discussion when we were talking about RM and AP and all those divers with, blue blood. I like that thing. That is awesome. And I'd probably take the swordfish model because I like the black and the blue combo. All right, guys, let us know, what would you put in your collection of ideal dive watches? And until next time, time out.